Welcome back to the Scope series. Last module we looked at async, and how it hands work to a separate thread. This module is about containers, flow, subflow, and private flow. All three group components together and control how they're called. They look similar on the canvas, but the differences matter. A flow is reusable across your application. A private flow stays private to one app. A subflow is lightweight. Let's see exactly what sets them apart. Here's what all three do. They're containers, flow, subflow, and private flow wrap components together. You call them from elsewhere in your flow using flow reference. The caller gets the result synchronously. They wait for the container to finish. That's different from async, which fires and forgets. These three always wait. The differences are about threading, error handling, and whether other applications can see them. Flow is callable from anywhere. Private flow is internal only. Subflow is simple grouping. Click a flow on the canvas and you see the properties. Display name, which is the label. And for flow specifically, there's async. Check it only if you want this flow to run on a separate thread. If you check async on a flow, it behaves like a sync scope, separate thread. The caller doesn't wait, and the event is copied. There's also initial state, started, stopped, or never. This controls whether the flow is initialized when the app starts. Subflow has fewer options because it's simpler. Private flow has the visibility restriction. It cannot be called from outside this app. Make your choice based on visibility. Do other applications need to invoke this flow? Now the crucial part, what happens to the event? With flow and subflow, the caller's event is passed indirectly. Variables you set inside the flow escape back to the caller. If you set a variable in the flow, the parent flow sees it. With private flow, it gets its own isolated event. Variables set inside stay inside. Private flow is true isolation. Flow and subflow share the parent's context. That shared context makes them convenient for reuse. Set a variable in the child flow, read it in the parent. But private flow's isolation makes it safer for encapsulation. What happens in the private flow doesn't leak out. Transactions. All three of these work inside a transaction. They run on your thread, part of the same transaction. If the flow fails, the transaction rolls back. If it succeeds, the transaction continues. This is unlike async and parallel for each, which have transaction problems. Big exception. If you mark a flow with async, it behaves like a sync scope, separate thread, outside the transaction. No rollback. So if you're inside a transaction, never mark flow as async. Use plain flow or private flow. Naming these three. For flow, start with a verb. Get customer details. Validate order. Transform to database. These are reusable operations. Subflow gets similar names. Log and continue. Transform data. For private flow, especially if it's internal implementation, you might prefix it with an underscore. Underscore internal map to database. Underscore internal prepare payload. That visual signal tells the next person. This flow is private. Don't call it from elsewhere. Good practice. Use flow for reusable business logic that multiple endpoints or flows call. When the caller needs the result synchronously and you want to modularize, use subflow for simple grouping of related components. Use private flow when the logic is internal to this app, and you need variable isolation. Bad practice. Marking a flow as async unless you specifically need asynchronous behavior. Using private flow for something other applications legitimately need. Nesting flows 5 levels deep without documentation. Or using a flow to avoid building a proper data model. When not to use them, don't use flow for tiny one-off operations. Single set variable, just do it in the main flow. Don't use subflow expecting it to be lighter if you only call it once. There's no reuse benefit. Don't use private flow for something that other applications in your deployment need to call. And don't use any of them if you need fire and forget behavior. That's a sync scope. These three are always synchronous. How many flows should you have? A typical application has 5 to 10 flows. A few top-level flows that are called from endpoints or other flows. Several helper flows for reusable logic. If you find yourself with 50 flows, check. Are these genuinely reusable, or are they just tiny wrappers? If you have flows called from only one place, consolidate them. The question isn't how many flows, it's how many are actually reused. Let's make it concrete. An e-commerce system has multiple endpoints. One to create an order, another to update it. Both endpoints use the same validation and transformation logic, so you build flow reference, validate order, called from both endpoints. When a new endpoint is added, it also calls validate order. You also have send confirmation email, which is internal to the app and uses variables you don't want leaking. Make it a private flow. The top-level endpoint flow is a regular flow, called from the HTTP listener. The questions interviewers ask: 1. What's the difference between flow and subflow? Historically, subflow was designed as a lightweight wrapper. In modern Mule, they behave almost identically. Use flow for clarity. 2. Do variables set in a flow escape to the parent? Yes, flow and subflow share the parent's event. 3. Does private flow inherit the parent's error handler? No, private flow has its own isolated error handling. 4. Can another application call a private flow? No, it's private to this Mule application. 5. Should you mark a flow as a sink? Only if you specifically need a separate thread. Doing so makes it behave like a sink scope. Copied event. No rollback in transactions. 6. What happens if a flow reference throws an error? The parent's error handler catches it. 7. When do you use each? Flow for reusable logic. Private flow for internal isolation. Subflow rarely anymore, unless you really want the simplicity signal. To recap, flow and subflow are synchronous, inherit the parent's event, and error handling cascades to the parent. Private flow is also synchronous but has isolated event scope and its own error handling. Variables escape from flow and subflow to the parent. They stay inside private flow. All three work inside transactions as long as you don't mark flow as a sink. Name them for what they do, starting with a verb. Use flow for reusable logic across the application. Use private flow when you need isolation. Next module. For each and parallel for each. How to repeat components over collections.